Welcome back. It's Andrea. Today we are joined with Tag Frothingham, who shares an incredible story of resilience and hope. Tag, as a young child, was diagnosed with severe depression and lived with it the majority of his life until he got cancer twice and was recommended a new treatment called transcranial magnetic stimulation, or TMS. Tag shares with us very openly what it's like to live with severe depression, how it affects his daily life, how it affects his social life. And then he also shares with us how TMS changed his life for the better and really gave him hope and joy and purpose for the future. I hope you enjoy this episode as much as I enjoyed speaking with Tag. If you did, please subscribe and share this with anyone that you think this might help. Thank you. Well, good morning, Tag. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Andrea.
Well, I am excited to dive into your story. Tag is got a unique perspective on life and mental health, and I cannot wait for you to share it with our audience. Tag, why don't you just share a little bit about just summarize your life for just a bit, and then we'll get knee deep into kind of what has changed your life significantly.
That sounds like a great idea. I'll keep this brief because nobody wants to listen to the full length story. So, in regards to what we'll be discussing today with the TMS, what led up to that is, as a young teenager, I was diagnosed with pretty severe depression, and I'd been fighting it for many, many years. I had learned to live a relatively normal life, gone through, went through school, held down jobs, and tried many different things, including medications that helped to certain degrees or other. About 10 years ago, I was diagnosed with cancer for the first time and went through a fairly detailed and traumatic experience with that, as a lot of cancer patients do in their journey there. And part of that is when I came out of it, I was just hit a new low. And I was dealing with some psychiatrists who specialized in dealing with cancer patients. And the doctor recommended that I look into TMS as a potential treatment for not just the long-term depression, but also what I'd been going through with the cancer treatment and how that had sort of exasperated the whole problem with me. I was up for it. I'm always willing to try something new potentially if it could be helpful for me, especially after coming off of cancer treatment. It didn't seem so bad as a treatment process. No medication involved. I go into the treatment center daily for half an hour, I think it was, for 6 weeks, 5 days a week.
Real quickly, can we go back because you had said that you had struggled with depression for really the majority of your life,
Yep.
and that you've tried several different modalities of treatment. How successful were those for you? Were they because to try something new leads me to believe that maybe they weren't the best.
So I'm old enough that I remember when Prozac hit the market, and I was I went on Prozac and then variants thereof, and those were really sort of the most helpful. And that would have been I don't know, about 30 years ago.
Okay.
And those helped in the sense that my depression did not get worse, if that makes sense.
Okay.
I had one psychiatrist Talk about how it was like sliding a board under your feet so you wouldn't sink farther.
Oh, wow. Well, that
And
doesn't sound great.
well, compared to where I could be going, it was a
Okay.
help, right?
Okay.
So with a lot of those sort of drugs that came out in that era, there were a lot of side effects.
Hmm.
Some of them were physical, some of them were more sort of mental, cognitive type
Hmm.
things, and I would struggle with those to the point as, a 20-something-year-old young man who didn't go to the doctor
Yeah.
would sort of go, I'm doing better now. I don't like being on the medication a whole lot because my brain is sort of foggy. I was having a hard time sleeping, or I was sleeping too much.
Right.
So, some of the effects of those medications were too similar to being depressed, where
Hmm.
it takes energy to think and straighten out your thoughts. You sleep a lot or you don't, as may be the case. The only difference was I wasn't getting worse,
Hmm.
if that helps. And for me, depression has been cyclical. I think my resting state at that time would have been, for most people, like pretty bad depression,
Hmm.
but it made me functional, and that was good enough.
Wow. Okay. So I know we weren't going to go here, but I am now. This is how it goes. Tell me what functional means when you have depression. What does it feel like?
Well, I mean, to give an example, well, let me give you a couple of examples, right? So I'm going to
Okay.
start off in college, which is a special time at the typical college age where you're probably sleeping a lot and at weird hours, anyways. But I was doing that constantly. Getting to classes was a lot of effort for me, more than just sort of, oh, I'm too tired, or I'd rather go hang out with my friends. It was literally like a battle with myself internally to get out of bed, go shower, force myself to get something to eat, go to class. And let me see, I got pretty good at that, forcing myself to do that. But everything else that you would experience in that sort of age, like the social side and all that,
Right.
suffered, right? Because I was spending all my energy just doing the basics,
Hmm.
and then when I had it left over, I would do my work. And because of the depression and the mind fog and all that kind of fun stuff, it would take me a lot longer to
Hmm.
get through my things. I was also found that I needed to focus on one thing at a time. I couldn't multitask
Hmm.
at all. So it was messy.
Yeah.
It was highly focused when I could be, and it was just an extraordinary amount of energy that I needed to expend to get through the day and not fail my classes and graduate eventually.
This is going to sound somewhat heartless, but it's not because I'm going to turn it around at the end. I
Hmm.
promise you. But when you see people in college or young people that appear to be lazy, right? In reality, after hearing something like this, they're the hardest working ones on campus, right? I mean, because you're trying to get through so much more than the average student. And, it's like trying to, I don't know, walk through a mattress and, just digging your way through it to get to the other side. That's incredible. Okay, the so you but that was on the medication. You still felt like that.
Yeah,
Good
yeah.
Lord.
So if you imagine sort of walking through like a swamp and it just gets,
Yeah. That's
it's,
probably a
it's
better example than a mattress. I mean, but
yeah, I mean, you're sort of getting pulled down and slowed, and Every step is an effort. What the medication did was, where I was slogging through this mess that was up to my, almost my hips, the medication prevented it from going up to my armpits. I mean,
Mm.
it's one way to think about it. I think it was easier than it could have been. If I hadn't been on the medication, I probably wouldn't have finished. I wouldn't have been able to complete my classes or get through
Mm-hmm.
all that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the difference. I think there's a misunderstanding that it's a silver bullet and you're sort of clear of depression.
Right.
You're not. It's just helping you function, get through the basic stuff that you need to get through.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it was sort of the bare minimum that I needed to do to make my way through my education at that point.
I hope I didn't offend you, by the way, by saying lazy, but I think it's so easy for the person that doesn't have any experience with depression to make assumptions about how somebody is maybe not able to, they're sleeping a lot, or they're not moving quickly, or they're, not finishing their work, to make an assumption that that person is a lazy college kid. In reality, it's not the case at all. So
No, and I've heard that all my life. I mean,
okay.
honestly,
I just
it's
don't
just
want you to think that I was being insensitive by any means. I actually was trying to bring a light
no, and
to
that was
that.
very common. The rise of Prozac started to get more attention into depression in that
Mm-hmm.
particular area of mental health, where people
Mm-hmm.
became more aware of it. I noticed a change slowly over
Right.
how people treated me at that
Mm-hmm.
point once they understood. The majority of people still don't. If you haven't experienced or don't have a loved one that's experienced depression, it's really difficult to understand what it's
Right.
actually like.
I agree. I agree. That is, um, and that's why I hope that more people can talk and share their story, so that you don't think it's just somebody who's sad. It's not that. There's so many more level. I mean, I think it's worse, right? It's worse.
It's a lack of feeling. You don't you yes, you feel sad, I guess, but it's not like, sad, oh, my pet goldfish died.
Right.
It is something that is just dragging you down. It's like this huge weight. And it's just, there's no rhyme or reason, and you can't nail it. You blame yourself.
Mm.
You get I don't know. I know things have changed enough in the mental health field nowadays, but, back then it was just, oh, he's lazy,
Yeah.
or he's not motivated, or something along those lines. It's stuff I grew up with. That was pretty much the diagnosis at the time.
Well, and Tag, I think that while some of it has changed, I still think there is this, sadly, this perception, unless you are aware that the person is struggling with something, there is this initial perception that that person, it's a character flaw, because one, people still don't want to just share what's going on, right? And so
Hmm.
they're looking at it as a character flaw instead of really an internal battle with an illness that is creating, these feelings and these challenges. So okay, so yeah, anyways, we could sit there and talk about that all day. But
Yes.
okay, the nice thing is, the beautiful thing is, so you found a woman and got married, so there must have been some relief, and you have two children. So you're raising a family now with still a depression that really isn't really solved, or you just still have that board under your feet.
Yeah, very much so. As I said, it's cyclical for me.
Okay.
So when I met my wife, and I actually had a few years where I was on a minor dose of medication, and it was great. Things were going well for me. I had taken on a job that I had no background in and was self-taught.
Mm,
And, a small but really strong group of friends that
mm,
understood me. And my wife got me,
mm.
even before we got married. and, but, things changed. It came back. She saw me taking a dip and
Mhm.
raised the red flags at that point, which was about the coolest thing I ever experienced initially in our marriage, right? Because
Oh
there was
my gosh,
somebody
that's
really
great.
watching out for me. And it was like, whoa.
Oh my, okay, that brings tears to my eyes. That is one of the sweetest things I've ever heard because to be seen and to be accepted.
Right. I'm not saying like, hey, this marriage was easy and it was great.
No.
It was a difficult time, and we've gone through difficult times since then.
Mhm.
As I talked about, the cancer stuff, which is a epic
Oh,
story unto itself. But that was a moment of like, wow, this is amazing. And it's about the time where I started seeing therapists on a much more regular and structured basis.
mhm.
I understood from my experiences previous to that I needed to find the right therapist. So it took a few years
Hmm.
for me to actually find somebody that I connected with and whose methods and approach clicked with me, right?
Sure. It's a very
And
personal relationship, isn't it?
incredibly,
Yeah.
yeah. And she's taught me a lot. I have a bag of tricks, a set of tools that is just huge now that I use
Mhm.
constantly, even now where I'm not feeling depressed
Mhm. Mhm.
all the time, that have just been like self care, sort of mental health tricks that keep me going, have kept me going through some really rough stuff. And now, it's I find myself doing some of these things, like mental checks and stuff with how I'm
Mhm.
actually doing, what's going on in my head, almost unconsciously at this
Mhm.
point. And
Mhm.
I've got to be honest. People say, oh, you should take medication, or like even the TMS
Mhm.
in parallel with actually a structured, time with a therapist of some sort
Mhm.
or another. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
This is not there is no single solution. There is no real solution
Right. Yeah.
for most mental health issues, especially depression. So,
When we first when we were trying to figure out what was going on with my son,
hmm
he's 11. I'm scared to death to put him on any kind of medication, but his situation was literally overnight, and uh, we didn't know what the heck was going on. But I had a psychiatrist tell me, our only psychiatrist who we've seen, who again, like you, long term relationship could be part of our family. I mean, just amazing. Psychiatrist, psychologist, the whole gamut. But she said to me, and this was at the time when it was only medication, was she was like, Andrea, you need the medication, or he needs the medication to quiet the chatter in his mind so that he can do the work that therapy provides. And at this point in his life, that chatter is so loud that he can't work efficiently with therapy. And that always kind of stuck in my head as so important because I think there are levels of mental health issues, right? That where you can maybe just go to therapy if the chatter isn't too loud. But if the chatter gets really loud, you have to do both. And you can't just take the medication because then you're not changing the behaviors. So they've kind of got to go hand in hand. And we'll talk about TMS in a minute, but like I always do, we kind of go off on a tangent, and I'm now interested in kind of this whole depression thing. So, anyways, so okay, so you had a great therapist. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt
still
you
do,
there.
still do.
Still,
She's still amazing. I still have regular appointments with her.
Yeah.
And we talk about anything. It's changed. I think I've got some interesting stories
That's
post TMS
sure.
that we can get into in a little bit, I
Okay.
think, after.
Okay. Yeah, I would love that. So, okay, so you got this marriage, and Gwen, who was a guest before, is a very special woman, and I was so impressed with the way that your family operated, because your children also have some mental health struggles. Is that correct?
That is true.
Okay.
And in fact, they have both gone through TMS at this point.
Okay. Okay. And then as a father who struggles with mental health, did you start noticing things that were maybe red flags with the kids as they were growing up and maturing?
Oh boy.
I know that was I told you I went on a sidetrack. I now am like thinking of the from the father standpoint and in your whole depression standpoint. So sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. So with our firstborn, we were getting feedback from sort of preschool, kindergarten, the early years of grade school, from teachers of behavioral issues, not, like acting out physically
Sure.
or anything like that. And I've got to say, even with my personal experience, and if you go back far enough, I actually worked in the mental health field.
Hmm.
I did not see those things.
Interesting.
I had my dad blinders on, right?
Sure.
Nothing's wrong with my kid. What are you talking about? Like,
Yeah.
this is,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, and as a parent, you don't know anything anyways, right? I
No,
mean,
it's
you're
on
like,
you.
yeah, you're like, oh, this must be normal kid behavior. I mean, how do you know?
Well, right. And we didn't see it to the
Yeah.
degree that the teachers were seeing it, quite honestly. And, at home was a safe space. So,
Mm-hmm.
it was an easier place for them to be
Sure.
at that time. And they were more comfortable there. So there wasn't as much acting out. They
Mm-hmm.
seemed, and, like your average young kid,
Mm-hmm.
pretty much happy, playing,
Mm-hmm.
a little goofy, nothing terribly abnormal. So it was very easy to ignore that feedback
Mm.
initially. We heard it enough that we sort of kind of had to look into it deeper. And we did a bunch of testing and many, psychiatric and psychology groups and so forth with that. And indeed the teachers were correct.
Mm-hmm.
And, that was, for me, I was going to say initially, but realistically, even now, there's moments where I'm just heartbroken that
Yeah.
they, have these things like depression,
Mm-hmm.
anxiety, which is
Mm-hmm.
not something that I have a large amount of,
Mm-hmm.
but very very serious forms of social anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
That was hard to take in.
Yeah.
It hurt a lot.
Well, because
But
at least from the depression side, what it feels like. Those parents like myself who don't, we can't relate to what the child's going through, so it's scary, and we're sad for them, but we have no real basis of understanding the true suffering that they're going through.
I would say that's even the same for somebody like me.
Yeah. Okay.
The perspective that I have is that I understand that how my brain works and why I'm depressed are at some level unique to me, right?
Okay.
And perhaps I had the perspective of understanding that it was unique to each of my kids as well. How, what they were experiencing, what they were feeling, what was going on in their head was going to be different from what my experiences have been.
Okay.
And I see that in their personalities, right? These are not copies of me. They
Yeah.
are two wonderful individuals with
Yeah.
very strong, independent personalities, and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
so they're experiencing something different than I ever have while trying to get through this. And
Yeah.
as parents, what we try to do is support them as best we can, look for the opportunities. I think you went through this with Gwen, actually,
Right.
and you know, try the different approaches. So we're being as supportive as we can be with the information that we have.
Yeah.
And, again, different era. Growing up, I was lazy.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that with my kids growing up, it was like, okay, they are fighting these mental health issues, and this is
Yeah.
why this is where their energy is going. This is what they need to focus on, as
Yeah.
opposed to, oh, they're lazy.
Well, I mean, you're coming from a perspective of knowledge, first of all, right?
Mhm.
You have much more knowledge and you have a lot more empathy, right? The empathy piece, I think, is huge. And their development has probably been their environment is so much more loving than probably you've come from. Not that your family wasn't loving, but even the people surrounding them they've got an advocate in their parents who know things. We're allowed to talk about it a little bit more than when you were a child. So, they're coming from a place of a little bit better understanding.
Right, and this is where things have changed,
Right.
and societal changes, where we're more
Right.
accepting of these diagnoses. We're more aware of the various
Yeah.
diagnoses. It's you look at how they can be broken down for various mental health issues
Hmm.
much more succinctly than 30 years ago,
Yeah.
40
Oh,
years ago, where it was a sort of you were tossed into one of a handful of buckets,
right.
and now it's a lot more focused. There's a lot more understanding,
Right.
and it's a little scary because the farther the researchers and everybody digs, the deeper it goes, and the
Yeah,
more
I know.
it's. But it is a better place where you to support people
Yeah.
with mental health issues.
So this is kind of a good moment to switch, I think, to TMS because you're talking about researchers and being able to find different modalities of treatment. And that's how, after talking to Gwen and understanding your story, I really wanted to talk to you because you were introduced to something called transcranial magnetic stimulation,
Yep.
TMS, which is a newer procedure in the whole sense. I mean, it's been around for a while, but it's just kind of, at least here in California, it's just kind of hitting mainstream. I know that I am a huge proponent of this because my daughter was able to partake in it last year when she turned 18, and it was a game changer for her. She prior to that, she had been on probably 15, 16 different types of medications or cocktails of medications. She had done biofeedback. She had done just a whole slew of different things, and nothing ever worked for her. And she did TMS, and luckily, she was one of the 60 or 70% of the people that it worked for, and it changed her life. It it literally changed her life. So I want to share what TMS is, and maybe you can kind of share what it is and how it works, and then get into like the details and how it like feels and that kind of such. I know, nice of you.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so it's kind of funky in some ways. TMS is not electroshock therapy, as we were
Yeah,
discussing earlier. It's
yeah,
not scary by any means. It is a highly focused magnetic pulse that's sent to a very specific area of your brain that helps the brain remap some of the synapses to overcome depression. So depression happens to be one of the first major areas that they're targeting with TMS. They're starting to target more and more with like severe anxiety issues, is my understanding. And there's some cutting edge, newer pieces that they're looking at that cover a whole wealth of different areas that are really interesting.
I
And
had actually heard too that it was started with depression, PTSD. It's supposed to be very effective with, and actually OCD. So those
yeah,
three, I think the FDA has approved it as a treatment, and now they're expanding it to various other parts of the brain.
yeah, the more research goes on, it's just expanding as to what can be done as they understand how the brain is mapped and all that. It's really fascinating stuff as far as what they're discovering along the way.
Yeah. Now
And
you mentioned that it's not like electroshock therapy. It's actually non-invasive at all, right? There's like you don't feel it at all, right?
well, sort of.
Okay.
Electroshock therapy in sort of the modern psychiatric sense is not the same as what we think of from the movies from the 1950s and so forth. It's very different there, but that's a different story. This, speaking of the 1950s, they sort of fit you with a helmet that looks like it's out of some 1950s space age thing. It's
Okay.
this big clunky plastic thing with a tube coming out the top or the back, and they sort of shuffle it all around, make markings on this little skull cap that you wear so that it
Right.
sits just right and targets a specific area. It then, when they kick it off, sends out little pulses, and it sounds a little bit like if anybody's had an MRI, that sort of like thumping sound, but like
Mm.
think of it in not as loud,
Okay.
uh, you know, uh, but what it feels like is if somebody is sort of, taking their finger and just poking you in the head every time there's a
Oh.
pulse. At least this is what it felt like for me. It was sort of like somebody snuck up behind me and was going tap 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 tap. Are you there? Like, and that was about it, like physically, that I felt while it was happening. In all honesty, I sat there with the technician most days and we watched YouTube videos for
Mm.
half an hour. That was it. Then I'd drive home. There was no pre-medication, no post-medication. For me, initially, I'd say for the first 3 of the 6 weeks, I'd come home and I'd suddenly be really tired for a little bit,
Hmm.
but then I'd come out of it.
Probably because your brain was like working out, right? Like I mean, if it's remapping, it's almost like it's working out the brain.
I guess, I don't know.
Hmm.
My younger child experienced the same thing. They also went through it,
Hmm.
and would get tired afterwards.
Hmm.
My older child, nothing, no
Hmm.
problems at all. And then, so you wear this goofy helmet in a small little room with this thing tapping and making noise, and you know that's all there is. It seems like science fiction, and
Incredible.
when it was recommended to me, I told the psychiatrist, I'm like, I'll try it because I'm open to trying anything,
Right.
but this doesn't sound like something that would actually work.
Yeah.
This sounds like science fiction, fantasy type of thing. And he's like, I thought that too until one of my fellowships was at a TMS center and I saw it work. and
Well, my daughter was like she was angry at me the night before our first treatment. She was mad at me, but she did not want to go. I mean, rightfully so, right? She had been through 16, 17 different medications and who knows how many other things and nothing worked. She didn't want to get her hopes up, but she yelled and said, "I'm only doing this for you." And she did it. And I will tell you that she actually was that doggone stubborn almost through the entire 35 days of treatment. And then at the end,
My eldest fought through the same sort of thing also. The difference is I've had a lifetime of this.
Yeah.
I had just gotten off all that cancer stuff.
Right.
So, at that point, it's like, what's the worst that could happen? Right.
Right.
I've already been through some pretty bad stuff.
Which, by the way, I don't want to make light of the cancer stuff. That I can't believe all that you've been through because Gwen also had cancer at the same time, right?
Right. I mean, are you interested in a brief timeline on that, or?
Yeah, let's do it just real quickly before we go into
Okay. So,
finish it.
you know, diagnosed with cancer. Of course, a surprise. Nobody expects cancer. I went through an excellent program here in Boston. They got me into remission after a bunch of chemotherapy, which was not easy to deal with. I experienced, a fair amount of side effects, some more so than others. At that point, I did not lose my hair. If anybody who's interested. Shortly after I was in remission, my wife was diagnosed with cancer as well. She went through the surgery, radiation, and chemotherapy process. Went into remission. We had about a year, and my cancer came back.
Mm.
And at the same time, they found a second, much rarer form of what I had. So I had two types of cancer this time. So that time was chemotherapy, much more aggressive than the first time around. I had to be hospitalized because the process was 12 hours
Mm.
to receive the chemo, and the infusion center was not open for 12 hours at a shot. So I'd go in every couple of weeks and get that. I then went to radiation to do that. Then I was put on the list for stem cell transplant, which is effectively most bone marrow transplants are now stem cell transplants for cancer patients, which was a month in the hospital. They basically kill your immune system.
Mm.
It's awful. It's brutal, and you come out just an absolute mess. I couldn't walk 50 feet without being exhausted. Everything had to be pristine clean because I had a brand new immune system at that
Right,
time,
right.
effectively. And it was 6 months before I could be around people other than my immediate family.
Did you have to go off any other medication? Were you able to treat your depression during this time too?
I was.
You
I
were. Okay.
was. So they, again,
Thank goodness, right?
yes. I had I had my oncology transplant team and my regular oncologist are superstars. They're spectacular, and they're the ones who set me up with a psychiatrist. They have a whole department at this particular hospital, which they the psychiatry group treats cancer patients.
Oh.
Right. So it's specific, and
Is that common that they would have that type of a, or do you know?
I don't know. We live in the Boston area,
Yeah.
which is, you know, some of the best hospitals in the world,
Sure. Yeah.
and practices. So that is something where we're really lucky.
Hmm.
And when I actually asked about, well, why do you have, a psychiatric oncology department? One of the psychiatrists was like, well, because most psychiatrists would just go, I don't know what to do. This is like too much.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they monitored my medications and how I was doing, and it's ultimately what led to the TMS. Was through that department
Okay.
and helping me get through this. And
Right.
part of the cancer treatment isn't just all the awful things that happen to your body, but it's it messes with your mind. I mean, quite
Yeah,
honestly,
absolutely.
it's your own mortality and your family and all the other bits and pieces of your life are just
Yeah,
turned upside down. It's
I can
it's
imagine.
an awful journey for not just the patient but everybody around them,
Yeah,
who try to support or be there in
yeah.
some way or another. So they had gleamed obviously onto that the mental health piece was important, and they were very excited that I had a long-standing therapist
Mm,
already and was continuing to see them
mhm.
to work through some of that. So that's sort of the genesis of where TMS came on the map. I was trying to get back to a normal life after I was allowed back in public. The irony being that when I was finally allowed into outside public spaces without a mask is when COVID hit.
Oh, gee.
So
Are you
I,
sure you're not donned in like a red jumpsuit and a cape and coming out as Mr. Incredible? With all of this, you you are amazing. Holy cow.
yeah, so everybody complaining about masks, it was so easy. I'd been doing it, you know, it was, uh, it was a shock. I tried going back to work part time to give me something to do. Realized my cognitive ability had just nosedived. I couldn't
Hmm.
think through anything. I, was expected to solve complex problems, and I could barely solve basic problems. A lot of
Interesting.
things had happened because when on the stem cell transplant with all the chemo and stuff leading
Yeah.
up to it, I couldn't work, like
Mm,
literally.
right.
And that sort of made everything spiral even more.
Sure.
So I was dealing with, all the questions of my mortality, what have I been doing in life, all these sort
Mm,
of existential things going on, trying to get back into work, getting dinged at work because I couldn't, produce like I used to.
mm.
And I just crashed, in all honesty. It was just, that was it. And I was in touch with my psychiatrist, and he's like, TMS, you need to look into this. So we made some adjustments to the medications I was on, nothing big, and I looked into TMS. And much like your daughter, it was life changing for me.
How quickly did you start seeing results?
So apparently, I'm quite unusual. I am
Okay.
one of the very lucky
Well,
few.
that's beyond even just the TMS piece.
I am, in a positive way for once, I am
Yeah.
unusual. So I started responding within about 2 weeks, less than
Wow.
10 days. I mean, it was fast.
Wow. So you felt it within 10 days. You felt a difference.
Right. So I wasn't sleeping, for example, because
Hmm.
of the stress of where I was mentally with my job, with my health, all the other things. I couldn't sleep. It was just too much going on in my head. I started sleeping through the night, and waking up rested within the first 10 days, was the first thing.
Wow.
So that was just mind boggling to me. I was skeptical and hopeful at the same time at
Yeah.
that point. And then it got better. Like I could handle multiple things going on at the same time, and I hadn't been able to do that since I was first diagnosed with cancer. And things started to sort of focus in my head a lot faster and a bit more clear. So I didn't have as much chaos going on in there. I was able to work through both internal and external, more difficult problems
Hmm.
without sort of just collapsing inward.
Mm-hmm.
And I can multitask for the first time in like 40 years, like properly.
Wow.
So for me, I am one of those very rare instances where it was just huge, huge changes, and quickly. And
Wow.
it's been a few years, and I'm still going strong with it. Like I haven't needed to go back and get
Tune up.
a tune up, as they say. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
exactly. Which is not uncommon. And it's,
Yeah.
in all honesty, even if I did, it's not a big deal because, as I said, you drive in, you sit down in this chair, wear a funky
Yeah.
helmet for 30 minutes, and you go home. Um, you
Yeah.
know,
So my daughter, she did it last year. And then not as quickly as you, but it was a game changer for her. And then she did need a tune up this year. And so she called and she drove down there. And for her, it was only 5 minutes. She literally drove 40 minutes, sat in the chair for 5 minutes, and then drove back home. And she's back to, it's just, it's amazing, amazing. But unfortunately, it doesn't work for everybody.
no, it does not. It is
Yeah.
it is one of those things, but you don't. We don't know. The researchers don't know. The clinicians don't know enough as to identify exactly why that happens,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and why it works for some people more than others. I don't know if it's that I'm older and I've experienced things and I'm better attuned
Mm-hmm.
to where my mind and body is than maybe a teenager,
Mm-hmm.
but it could just be how my brain's wired or was
Yeah.
wired. 'Cause it's
But it worked for your children. So it was such a good thing for you, you decided to introduce your kids to it.
Well, yes, with our eldest, that's
Okay.
that's that's what we did, and as I said earlier, very resistant to the whole thing
Mm-hmm.
and kind of
Mm-hmm.
holding it against us all the way to the end.
Yeah.
Still doesn't admit that it did any good.
Oh,
Though we,
really?
oh yeah,
Those teenagers are so stubborn.
but we noticed the changes,
Yeah.
right? And we still notice the changes. It's been over a year for
Okay.
that child. The younger one requested it because they had seen my changes
Yeah.
and they had also noticed the changes in their older sibling.
Interesting. Yeah.
And they said, well, if I'm depressed and I've got a bit of anxiety, can I try it? And,
Yeah.
okay, yeah, the state just allowed younger,
Yeah.
sort of mid-teenagers, they're 16, to do it. So there we go. And it worked. The response for them was not as rapid as mine,
Sure.
but the depression wasn't as deep either. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
there goes that part.
Sure.
But there was anxiety wrapped up, as often is the case with depression and anxiety go hand in
Right.
hand.
Yeah.
The school year has started off, and it has been the best start to a school year we've had with this child, and they are working hard, doing well, having a good time,
Mm-hmm.
looking, forward to college and
Mm.
actually researching what they want to do in college and which
Oh my
colleges offer
gosh.
it. And I'm just, sort of blown away by that. And
Yeah.
so, yes, it helped both of them,
Mm-hmm.
whether they accept it or not. We
Right.
certainly do. And for me, it's just as I said, life changing. I mentioned earlier the story of my therapist.
Yeah.
About 3 or 4 weeks into TMS, I sat down with my therapist and we discussed what we wanted to talk about that day, what was sort of on my mind, and I'm like, okay, so you've been wonderful at helping me get out of crises, with my mental health and working this, coming out into a sort of normal or having the tools to work through a more normal life. And it's been wonderful and absolutely amazing. My problem now is that I have the bandwidth, the interest, and the general energy that I can do a whole bunch of things
Mm.
at once. Like, it's no longer like, what am I capable of, like,
Yeah.
realistically for the next day, week, whatever.
Uh-huh.
It's I suddenly have all these things, and I don't know what to do with myself. it's like it's like
There's too many choices.
how do I handle this?
Yeah.
It's sort of like going to see the therapist for the flip side for me, right? It
Oh,
was
that's fantastic. That's
yeah,
fantastic.
yeah. It was new for both of us,
Yeah.
but it was
Oh,
interesting, and we still talk about that,
yeah.
these few years later, and they're quick to remind me that where I've come from, what I've been through, if I'm
Sure.
having a bouncier, sort of a rougher day or a
Sure.
week or whatever. On all honesty, I'm at the point where I already recognize that.
Yeah.
I can reflect on this stuff and go, oh, this is where I was, this is what was happening, and a whole lot of details around it. This is not something I could have done easily
Hmm. Hmm.
before the TMS.
Yeah.
In all honesty, the medications weren't doing this for me, right? So this is life changing that I'm able to reflect on some of the ugliness and take away the positives from it. I
Yeah.
don't sort of have a perseverance around the negatives all the time, and
Yeah.
which
Gosh.
is just sort of feeds the depression. I'm able to break those loops now without putting a ton of effort into it. So
What a wonderful perspective. I mean, think of you said in what the last 20 minutes that at one point in your life you were questioning your own mortality, right? And you were in like the lowest of lows. And then now you're you're looking at everything with such hope and joy. I mean, what a beautiful transition that you've been given.
well, there's a lot there. There's a lot of stuff that you could unpack about me
Yeah,
mixed in with that, right? So the TMS was one piece.
sure.
In all honesty, the 7, 8 years of constant cancer stuff in the family
Right.
certainly changes your perspective.
Yeah.
When I was getting the stem cell transplant, you spend about a month in the hospital. You're pretty heavily isolated because of
Hmm.
no immune system. And you're also insanely sick because they're basically trying to bring you as close to death as possible before they give you
Right.
the new stem cells. So there's time to think in those moments
Hmm.
of consciousness while in the hospital. And there was a lot of introspection I did, a lot of sort of
Hmm.
thinking about what I had done. Again, this is that sort of existential crisis type of thing. But also a lot of what do I want to do?
Hmm.
And where do I want to be? What's important to me?
Hmm.
And I made decisions at that time that I've since followed through on some of them, but they happened post TMS,
Hmm.
that really sort of shook things up and put me in a better place mentally in a lot of ways,
Hmm.
even without the TMS.
Hmm.
So one of the things is I'd always wanted to go back to school and get my advanced degree. I wanted to go back to my roots that were more in psychology and the arts and all
Hmm.
that. And when I hit that low and when I had the TMS, I came out of the TMS and thought, yeah, I need to do this. I need to make this big switch.
Hmm.
So since then, I have gone back to grad school and graduated in a totally different field. Loved every minute of it. Heck, I academically did significantly better than I did as an undergrad at 20 something. Um,
Yeah.
and, I'm headed down a path that I am much more comfortable, much happier about. And it was a buildup of all those things, with the
Mm-hmm.
TMS giving me that final push to actually be able to do this.
Mm-hmm.
Studying for 8 hours every day plus hours, doing the
Right.
work I needed to do. I'm not sure I would have attacked it with the same vigor and interest.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it had been the same thing, something I'm really interested in and
Yeah.
love doing.
You might not have had
If
the
I
ability to do it. I mean,
exactly,
it would have been so exhausting based on what you had said before.
exactly, yeah.
Mm.
So it's a very different place. Um, and I recognize that my depression's not gone
Yeah.
per se. I recognize that I'm still dealing with side effects from all the cancer treatments.
Sure.
And some of those have been cognitive.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, that has become clearer because I have the ability to sort of mentally manage this. And because I'm able to do that, it continues to put me on a good path forward,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I would have focused on the negative things that happened. So, like, I've been dealing with long standing, slowly improving cognitive issues. Like, I haven't been able to
Mm-hmm.
think as quickly or as
Sure.
clearly since the chemo, especially. It just made everything 10 times worse.
Mm-hmm.
So that's still clearing out for me, which is kind of, I had a moment of realization a couple of months ago about that, and I was just sort of like, oh, yeah. The difference is that I went, yeah, give myself some room for that, as
Yeah.
opposed to I'm never going to get out of this, and
Mm.
sort of just sitting in that endless circle of like how awful I am, how
Yeah.
lazy I am,
Mm.
all that kind of fun stuff that others and you tell yourself, or what you think others have told you. That
Right.
depression,
Yeah.
distorts that reality, and I've been able to get out of that. And that's really what the TMS did for me, is it allowed me to break those cycles
Mm-hmm.
and develop new behaviors that have been absolutely life-changing. It's why we supported my kids going through it,
Mm-hmm.
because the risk is just so insanely low.
Right.
And the odds of it working are decent. I mean, they're
Mm-hmm.
not
Right. It's
great,
worth the
great,
shot.
but it's worth a shot. It,
I
it is
agree.
it is super low effort. I mean,
Yeah.
you spend more time in the car quite often than you do at the appointment.
That was true with us. Yes.
That was true for all three of us here. So,
Tag, you
yeah.
don't know how grateful I am for you sharing this. I mean, I do have a little bit of a tear coming out. I am so grateful for you and your family and all that you've shared with us. And I hope that one, you continue to see joy, hope, and happiness in your life. And then also, I hope that we are able together to get this message out to anyone who can benefit from it. I mean, it really, yeah, I'm
It,
just
it,
so grateful. Thank you.
yeah, it is. It is. It's a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
If it works for you, it's life changing, and it's worth the risk, because unlike the medications, there's not a whole lot to go wrong.
No, there's not. There's
Yeah.
not. Oh, Tag. Okay. I'm going to hit stop record. You did. You made me tear up. Oh my goodness, Tag.